going to be able to compare people who read the labels with people who didn't read the labels, and they're going to be able to tell if a food that slipped through that we now think is perfectly fine is in fact related to some things we haven't thought about now. So with those labels, we get that extra added security of being able to catch things when they slip through the process. For all these reasons, labels work, people want them, and we might just be able to detect something we don't really know now that we ought to have detected in the future. I want to say that these are entirely my own opinions, and I'm not speaking as an official university representative, but I do think that this is a pretty good idea. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Senator, Mr. Chair, Senator Holmes, Senator Frerichs, and if Senator Brady comes in. My name is William Kling, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today at this subject matter hearing to testify in support of Senate Bill 1666 concerning labeling of genetically engineered food. As an attorney and policy expert for almost 30 years, I have focused my work on improving the lives of children, youth, and family, and the communities in which they live. One of the many hats I wear is as an adjunct professor of law at IIT Chicago-Kent College of Law, where I teach law students how to engage in the policy process, and I have some law students here today observing this hearing. Several years ago, Senators, I worked on the creation of the Illinois Food Systems.
Let me just interrupt you a second. We have another media request, Illinois Right to Know, NBC Chicago, and I'll grant them permission. Go ahead.
Thank you. Several years ago, I worked on the creation of the Illinois Food Systems Policy Council legislation at the state level here, and also worked at the federal level on the last Farm Bill. In that cycle, we worked on the Healthy Urban Food Enterprise Development Center. So I've done quite a bit of work on food policy related issues. This year, I'm struck by the number of new members of the General Assembly, particularly on the House side, and I know that with new members comes new priorities and issues. And I believe that the regulation of genetically engineered food is a relatively new issue facing state legislatures. As such, I really appreciate your approach to developing sound public policy by engaging in the series of subject matter hearings that this is one of, to garner as much knowledge as you can as possible on this important issue. So great approach on that. As a professor at the University of Illinois Chicago School of Public Health, I'm particularly interested in the public health issues surrounding food and food systems. One issue I believe warrants a full policy strategy is how to regulate the production and labeling of genetically engineered food. While much of what you've heard over the past several months relating to the research around genetically engineered food is truly not yet settled, I submit that the fundamental issue before you today relates to consumers having necessary information to make informed and educated decisions about the food that they eat, and you heard from my colleague on some of that earlier. This proactive policy approach is sound because genetically engineered food is a relatively new technology with potential significant health risks. The precautionary principle is not a revolutionary idea. The European Union operates under what's called the precautionary principle, assessing each food's safety before approving its commercialization. Over 60 countries have given consumers the right to know about genetically engineered food by passing mandatory labeling regulations, including all European Union member states, Australia, Brazil, China, Japan, Korea, New Zealand, Russia, and Saudi Arabia. At its crux, Senator, Senate Bill 1666 is a consumer protection bill, and without question, giving consumers more information about the food they eat is good public policy. In my experience, good public policy is proactive, as I said, and adequately responds to both interest-based and constituency-based needs. In this case, it's clear that constituents are in favor of labeling genetically engineered food. And you heard from my colleague, but I'll just reiterate a couple things. While a relatively new issue on the policy scene, polls going back over 10 years demonstrate consumers' desire to be informed about the food that they eat. An ABC News poll, as she mentioned, conducted in 2001, found that 93% of Americans believe the federal government should require manufacturers to label genetically engineered foods. In 2008, the New York Times poll she mentioned found that 87% of American consumers wanted GE ingredients labeled. That's a mandate. And then in 2012, more recently, 91% of voters polled in a Mellman Group study called on the FDA to require labels on genetically engineered foods or goods containing genetically engineered ingredients. Clearly, at the state level, within your jurisdictional rights and priorities, Senate Bill 66 responds to this consumer-driven issue. As a public health practitioner, I believe it is in all of our interests, consumers, producers, and policymakers, to regulate the labeling of our food to include information on whether the product is genetically engineered. Requiring labeling is an appropriate role for government to take to give consumers the information they need to make, and we all need, to make rational decisions. It is a sensible addition to require, in the ways that we require nutrition, ingredients, and country of origin information on labels, to include the genetically engineered information. It allows us to make better informed decisions about the food that we eat. In summary, I would strongly urge you to consider passage of Senate Bill 1666 relating to labeling of genetically engineered food. The bill, as drafted, Senator, represents a reasonable and rational approach to addressing this important consumer protection issue. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you, and I officially want to welcome Senator Brady to the subcommittee. Is there any questions by any members of the committee? Senator Holmes.
Good morning, Senator.
Turn your microphone on.
Oh, sorry. Thanks, Mike. Based on your testimony, I want to just go over on the bill doesn't say we have to label with any of the specific ingredients used
Right.
to genetically. So all we're doing is doing a broad-based label that says it's been genetically modified. In this bill, we don't label meat, milk, eggs, cheese, anything that comes from an animal that's been fed genetically modified foods. I mean, let's face it, we have a lot of corn-fed beef, so I'm assuming now we're okay eating that meat even though the animal has been fed, the animal that we're consuming has been fed genetically engineered foods. So is that still going to present a problem?
Well, I'm not a subject matter expert on the medical, and I know we have other panelists that